Hello everybody, welcome. In a rare inversion of my common habit, I'm making a recording in the light of the sun. Often I wait for the tumult of the daytime activities of the moderns to die down and walk beneath the starfield. But today, I'm having some insights that I hope to explore with you in the daytime, and I'm out for a walk where color and form provides a contrast to the nocturnal situation. I've been listening lately to physicists talking about the origins of the knowledge systems we presently pursue, and particularly the origins of relativity and its relationship to quantum mechanics. And one of the differences between these two models, visions, if you will, of how things work, both of which are fundamentally oriented toward prediction of future states of situations. And in some cases, to understandings of previous states. The strange thing about relativity as opposed to quantum mechanics is that relativity gives us something resembling an idea of sort of what the universe is doing. Not necessarily what it is, but what it's up to. And I would argue that that picture is fundamentally mechanical, and so is concerned with things and processes more than it's concerned with beings and relationships. And yet, the word relativity seems to ask us to think more in terms of relation than of things. And this is in opposition to quantum mechanics, which doesn't answer fundamental questions, but rather gives us a computational grasp on processes at the submicroscopic level. And what we find there is fairly confusing. So rather than the universe being made of stuff with relationships that are intuitive to us, in quantum mechanics we simply find that there's an ironic trope. The universe is something like, shut up and calculate tronium. Never mind the important questions about beings and relationships and time-space and the nature of the universe. What we have are simply equations that help us to understand something about the processes and their features and transformations over time. Now, this is a little bit disingenuous because quantum mechanics does work with something like the building blocks, quote unquote. I'm not a fan of that term. That are familiar from nuclear physics. Photons and electrons, perhaps quarks and so on. So we have these two competing views, or actually, rather than being competing, there are two views about one fundamental thing, the relationship between which is largely unclear, but seems at present to orbit the concept of gravity. In some of my talks, some people might get the idea that I'm anti-science. This is the furthest thing from the truth. Researchers and their findings, and especially science fiction authors, have been among my most treasured mentors. The problem is that science as usually practiced by humans, and the usually is very important, tends toward objectivism and physicalism. That is, we want to know what is the same in the universe if we subtract observers, beings with minds, to whatever degree we may be capable of doing so in the frames of research that are most commonly pursued. Now, there are always mavericks out there who want to transform science in various ways, and some of these mavericks are loopy. And some of them are brilliant, and it's a topology just like any other idea we might think about. I think what I'm concerned about is situations in which science, having subtracted from thought and experience the uniqueness of individual beings and groups of beings for the purposes of producing reliable, repeatable experiments with instruments, it places us in danger of allowing the findings of science to present to our minds a universe of things and processes, and the incredible authority of science, which is natural due to the structure of proofs and so on. There's nothing much to balance that out. There's nothing as profoundly authoritative as an equation. Unless, of course, we realize that the equations are the produce of minds. and minds will not be captured by the equations, even though it may become possible to simulate some of the activities of minds, beings, in computational environments. My own concerns include those of science and research, but I think stand far beyond them. Because it seems to me, not just from my conceptual thought, but from my direct experience, that the universe and the earth and the organisms and so on are more than merely alive. They're doing things together that are transcendental to anything science is likely to reveal to us in the near term. And so I strongly, very strongly suspect that the nature of time-space and the fundamental questions about structure and discovery and so on is the result of relationships between intelligences and families of intelligences that we've only rarely been bold enough to imagine anything that resembles them. It comes down to a sort of fundamental question: is the universe more like a being or more like a machine? And science treats it largely in the latter fashion. The scientific atmosphere is inclined toward this position. And again, I think it's very important to have ways of knowing that are like this. I just think it's very dangerous when they become dominant, and it's even more dangerous when modern humans, having failed to assemble anything resembling an intelligent society, inherit the technologies that naturally emerge from scientific research, but the purposes for which they apply these technologies tend by and large to be omnicidal, even where the promise of something resembling a utopia or a profoundly intelligent human society is potentiated by the technologies. Right? One can imagine a species so intelligent that with nothing more than a pencil, that with any simple array of tools, the purposes for which they would apply those tools would be radically transcendent to anything humans have ever done in large groups. Small groups, kind of a different story. So you have this problem where you have a species, ours, that is terrifically inclined, as if there's a sort of gravity in us, to catastrophically misapply the findings of research and even physics. There are worse problems like being completely ignorant of the nature of time-space and building a device like the Large Hadron Collider. Might we be making irreversible mistakes by playing around with something that we think of as mechanical in a way that could damage even the nature, the fabric of local time space. Right? And if, as I suggest, that fabric is itself transcendentally intelligent, meta-sentient, in a relational way rather than a mechanical way, we find that the humans continuously invent devices and processes that are lethal to the biosphere, the humans themselves, potentially our minds. Actually, I wouldn't say potentially, certainly our minds. And possibly, if there's any such thing, and I would argue that there's something that resembles it, not just our own souls, but the soul of our species and the history and future of life on Earth, all the beings here. And if the worlds are connected, if the living worlds are connected, and I would argue that they are, instantaneously, moment to moment, then any damage we do here becomes contagious in time-space. Most of the ways that humans employ technologies are in service to inclinations and ideas that are not only not intelligent and lethal when enacted, they are delusional, right? We imagine that commodities are fundamental to the nature of organismal reality. Everything needs food. But when a creature arises that's capable of making machines and obliterating the anciently conserved ecologies in a single geological heartbeat or a thousandth of one, and then proceed with that agenda for the sake of the representation of value, power, efficacy, we have a problem that could be far more universal in its scope of effect than any of the humans have dared to imagine, because we think in terms of individuals and separate things. We think our world is separate. We think we're alone in time-space. I say to you that nothing like that is even possible. And the ways in which it is apparent to us are largely illusions generated by our habits of thought and the purposes that drive the cognitive distinctions, the cuts that we make in the manifold of reality, or that which is, or the universe. And many of those purposes are fundamentally disease-like and rapidly lead to devastating consequences. Imagine so it seems to me that the real frontier isn't merely consciousness, by which we might mean, the kinds of stuff that happens in minds of humans while awake, awareness, so on. And these words are value-laden. It's important that we define them carefully if we're going to use them. And I'm going to use them a little bit casually here. Something has affected the supralog of the intelligence of our species, right, at the group level. You know, all the stuff that happens, especially at the vast group level. And so it's as if our species has been captured by something that continues to produce ever more dire implementations of the actual possibilities of our nature and situation as living beings here on Earth. I guess this is one of my most fundamental concerns. How might we become aware of what has captured our species, our vulnerabilities, and produce something that at least resembles medicine? You know, I was reading Cassare's Language and Myth this morning, and he was talking about the difference between mythic consciousness, in which a single feature of our experience suddenly acquires such incredible significance that for all intents and purposes it becomes in consciousness something resembling a god. The difference between that and what happens in discursive thought, in referential and representational language. And of course he's concerned with the same problem I am. What happened to the humans to produce the situations in which we now find ourselves? It's funny, I was just pausing in my recording to do Tai Chi, practice my form. It's the 108 Wu form. And while I've been making my recording, I learned to put my phone into what's called airplane mode so that it won't receive calls and signals that would necessarily interrupt my recording. And that can be understood as the mode of local, right, where I'm placing precedence on the local situation, to me, what I'm doing right now. Yeah. And it struck me as I turned it off while doing Tai Chi. Good morning, or afternoon actually. That science is a bit like airplane mode. Right? And weirdly, religion, which pretends to be the opposite of airplane mode, where we're going to listen to the universe and participate with it, turns out to be its own weird form of contagious airplane mode. No signals get through. So this morning as I was reading Cassare, it's very clear to me that our ancient ancestors had not just forms of intelligence and awareness that we moderns have little exposure to, though again, it's always a topology. There are individuals and small groups who do listen to the universe and do so without a lot of domineering models and ideas and defenses and arguments and so on. It occurred to me this morning that And it's not a new thought. But imagine that our minds are actually meant to be vehicles of participation with the entire family of intelligences in time-space. And believe me when I say, that is an incredibly diverse and profoundly astonishing family. It's not merely that there are physical organisms and non-physical beings that we call gods or angels or demons or so on. No, the actual situation is far more astonishing than any of our relatively plebeian derivations. So imagine that we're born, each of us, with the capacity to directly participate in the family of intelligences that comprise time-space. But something happens to us. We undergo the processes of enlanguaging and enculturation in the societies that we are born into. And I've used this metaphor many times. It's as if we're born with 1,000 different kinds of wings for flight in many different domains of relation. And the processes that are supposed to empower and liberate us have largely the opposite effect. It is as if, we can imagine a science fiction story. And our story as humans has certainly become 12 different kinds of science fiction stories. And at least 11 of them are incredibly dire. But you can imagine a species that's born with a mechanical, they have a mechanical technology that resembles a time-space ship, a vehicle, that can not only instantaneously traverse any specific distance between our world and another world or a position in space-time, and it's capable of traversing time as well. So it has the capacity to instantaneously take us to other worlds. But it's so powerful that it has the capacity to take us to any subset of positions in time-space. All possible subsets, all groupings of subsets, and so on. But instead of using it for travel and relation and learning, this science fiction species worships the ship. And so they never use it for travel or relation or learning. It's a commodity. And they keep dressing the ship up and making museums out of it. And the ship, they never enter it to go anywhere. It just becomes a representation of power or status or something like this. And if we want a non-mechanical metaphor, you can imagine a species of birds or an animal that can change shape into any of the animals, or any group of the animals, and so on. But these birds chain themselves to boxes and make lots of stories about we have the best box. They never fly, they never swim, they never slither or crawl or burrow. They are chained to the representation of their abilities. In a sense, they worship the representations. And our species is facing a problem very similar to this. These are analogies of what's happening to us. What I want you to understand is the universe is more than merely intelligent, it's purposive. It doesn't necessarily have a purpose, but the actual situation is so astonishing that it would obliterate all forms of representational thought forever if we were introduced to it directly. Of course, the staggering momentum of the milieu in which our minds arise and exist has the capacity to obliterate them, and perhaps this is what we mean when we use the phrase or the word enlightenment. It doesn't mean that post-enlightenment we will be incapable of representational cognition. It means that it will no longer have precedence in thought or behavior or relation. And it's incredibly tragic that we seem to be trapped. And even knowing these things, I myself am somewhat trapped. In the situation of those birds chained to the cages they formed in their minds. Now, the humans are suffering from this. And they're not intrinsically bad or wrong. They actually have some kind of an array of noble roles in timespace that are natural to us, however divorced we may be from directly experiencing or embodying them. And so it's not really the humans that are bad. It's that strange situation, their cognition, places them in where they are vulnerable. To being captured by the ersatz, glitz of representational thought and physical technology. There are analogs of technology in consciousness. And these analogs are my fundamental concern, because if we cannot give the humans a taste of their actual role and liberty, they will continue to destroy themselves and maybe time-space itself and anything else that their technologies can convert into representations or commodities. And you see an echo of this problem in religious literature. Such as the Bible or the Quran, right? Where there are admonitions against the forming of something called idols, and also in some of the religions that surround the Quran, there's an admonition against making an image of anything.
How you doing?
Hey, nice to see you. These admonitions are important. They get at a root problem that once they become blurry, or the humans start to do this, many terrifying processes will propagate. You know, I often speak very intellectually in these recordings, but I want to speak passionately for a moment, to tell each one of you And even if I could talk to the species, I would say you were born for something so noble and beautiful that nothing in human culture even approximates it. Not the finest aspirations of art and science and creativity, though these fields have some relation with it. We were born, the nature of our humanity and our situations as beings in time-space is so profoundly beautiful that if we could but glimpse it, we would fail to forget over and over again in new ways per second what it means to be alive in the family of all of the beings in all of time. There's something right next door. It's literally in our hands that is so profoundly beautiful and noble and virtuous and true and deeply alive and compassionate and real. And yet nearly all of us will spend all of our lives blundering around in the battlefield of representational cognition, objects, technologies, language, so that we will literally live lives false to our nature. Time-space itself is up to something. The earth is being someone. The sun is being someone in this family. These are beings and relationships. They are not objects. They are not dead processes. And it should be obvious from the fact that our own minds exist at all, that something produces these feelings, and it's something, these urgencies in our souls, and it's something more than genes and natural selection, much more. If the humans continue to do what they generally do, we will obliterate ourselves. And unfortunately, we will take with us the anciently conserved ecologies of Earth, which are moment to moment the origins and relationships of inheritance from which our minds arise moment to moment. And some will argue, well, life is resilient, the humans are resilient, you probably won't obliterate all the humans, and so on. These questions are trivial. These objections are trivial. They have nothing to do with the intrinsically precious and noble nature of being and life on Earth. I don't think it's likely that anything other than cataclysm will redirect the humans, though it is possible. What's very unlikely is that there will be large-scale systemic change without incredibly horrific, tragic catastrophe. Tragic because unnecessary. The hope lies, in so far as I can understand it, in small, tightly knit groups rediscovering the nature of the humans, organisms in general, beings in general, minds, and reconnecting us with the network of intelligences that are responsible for the structure of time-space. The transcendental intelligences, embodied or not, that are probably the origin of our minds and perhaps our own species. I often imagine a situation where our ancestors were in direct contact with these intelligences, many of them most likely transphysical, and our minds were born in symbiotic union with theirs. And then, over time, there was something resembling an accident, and the link between our species and these intelligences broke down over time, and was then mimicked and represented in religion and perhaps science. It's conceivable to me that a small group of humans, and we can easily do this together in a limited way over a short duration, anytime we come together with purposes that are truly wandering in the direction of virtue and intelligence and placing precedence on unity and relation rather than on distinction, power, and commodity. I can imagine a small group of humans becoming so brilliantly human together that they re-establish the link between our species and the family of intelligences that timespace is the result of. And I can imagine this becoming incredibly contagious, much more contagious than any of the daemon-like processes that presently imprison nearly all of us and most of the complex living world, the animals and living places. And I guess I have a dream about this, a vision. I'm coming to the intersection where many machines dominate the terrain.
Wait.
And it's so dangerous that we have to have special signals there to allow the organisms that understand the street lights and built them to survive crossing that gap that is dominated by the cars and trucks and so on. Somehow we must learn together to unchain our minds from the battlefield of representational cognition and grant them the anamnesis, the recollection, the directly experienced liberty that comes from even a moment of contact. You know, I had a kind of cartoon in my mind earlier. I had discovered some organism swimming in the water, and I'd never seen anything like it. And at least I'd never had an experience like the one I was having. And the organism was very small and unusual, and I couldn't tell to which category of organisms it belonged. I couldn't tell at first whether it was an insect or an amphibian or perhaps some kind of strange tiny fish. And in the moment of not knowing, there was liberty. Right? Finally, I don't know the what of my experience, what I'm focused on, but I'm present in wonder and curiosity. And this, I think, is a beautiful moment. Later, after I'd spent some time observing the organism and so on, I felt I came to an understanding of what it was in terms of the human categories. But a sort of cartoon-like vision came into my mind where a human is gently relating with something it thinks of as an insect, let's say a praying mantis, for example. And then the classic icon of an alien, right? The thin body, long fingers, 3 digits maybe, praying mantis-like face with great big eyes and tiny nostrils and mandibles and so on. So I saw this like ladder, right? The human is relating with the insect, the alien is relating with the human, but strangely, it's not like this cartoon. It's almost the opposite, right? The intelligences of time-space are present and alive and aware in the praying mantis, but the human thinks of them as an insect, separate from themselves. And the same is true in the human idea of the aliens with their potentially astonishing, quote, technologies, unquote, relating with the human. But all of this is backwards. This is one family. And the aliens' technologies may have nothing to do with our ideas of machines. It also occurred to me, since I've been listening to physicists lately, that there are some models where there's something resembling an anti-universe, a sort of twin to our universe that has different properties. And these two universes are intimately co-emergent. And I've spent a great deal of time thinking about aliens and what it might be like to have an actual relationship with some. And I've had experiences that are at least that strange, and probably stranger. And many of them were not momentary, right? They lasted a long time. Perhaps they are still lasting in ways that are not as obvious to my current waking consciousness as they might become under certain circumstances. We belong to a family of intelligences, and the nature of time-space is not about things. There's something fundamentally heroic in our origins and tribulations, something shared by all beings in all of time, as if they are fundamentally first a unity and only trivially appear to arise and compete, perhaps, and depart. These are my thoughts today. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon.